In the final hour of the final battle of a 7-year war, Korea's greatest admiral was shot through the chest by a stray bullet. With his last breath, he gave one order: "Do not announce my death. Beat the drums. Keep fighting." His men obeyed him for the rest of the battle, which they won without ever knowing their commander was already gone. That admiral's name was Yi Sun-sin, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why hiding his own death was the most Joseon thing he could possibly have done. This is the story of the Joseon Dynasty. 518 years, the longest-lasting dynasty this channel has ever covered. A kingdom that got invaded by 2 different empires and somehow outlasted them both. To understand how that admiral ended up dying on that deck, we have to go back 2 centuries earlier to a general who was given a direct order to invade Ming China and decided to turn his army around instead. The Goryeo Dynasty, which had ruled Korea for nearly 500 years, was falling apart by the 1380s. Weakened by decades of Mongol domination, court corruption, and a military class that had grown far more powerful than the throne it technically served. Generations of Mongol interference had hollowed out the Goryeo court's authority from within, while a handful of powerful noble families quietly absorbed most of the country's farmland into private estates, leaving the treasury starved of tax revenue and ordinary peasants with less and less land of their own to work. In 1388, the Goryeo court ordered one of its most capable generals, Yi Seong-gye, to invade Ming territory in Manchuria. He marched his army to a river island called Weihua, looked at the odds of a war against a much larger, better supplied Ming force, and simply refused to cross. Instead, he turned his army around and marched it straight back toward the capital. 4 years of political maneuvering later, in 1392, Yi Seong-gye deposed the last Goryeo king and declared himself the founder of a new dynasty. He called it Joseon. The name wasn't invented. It deliberately borrowed from Gojoseon, the legendary first Korean kingdom said to have been founded over 2,000 years earlier. A calculated move to claim descent from the very beginning of Korean civilization itself, rather than simply presenting the new regime as one more palace coup. Here's the first thing worth clearing up, because it tells you exactly what kind of dynasty this was going to be. One of Yi Seong-gye's very first acts was turning against the religion that had defined Korea for the previous 500 years. Buddhism was stripped of state support and political influence, and a strict, imported Chinese philosophy, Neo-Confucianism, became the new foundation of Korean government and society. The new capital was built at Hanyang, the city we now call Seoul, anchored by a grand new royal palace called Gyeongbokgung, the Palace of Shining Happiness. Every aspect of its layout, like the philosophy running the country now, followed strict Confucian principles of order and hierarchy. That hierarchy extended to every level of Joseon society. At the top sat the Yangban, a hereditary class of scholar officials whose status depended on passing the same brutal Confucian civil examinations this channel has already described in its China videos, adapted directly from the same tradition. Below them came commoners, then a low-born class that included slaves, entertainers, and butchers, a rigid 4-tier system that shaped daily Korean life for the entire 5 centuries this dynasty existed. Confucian family ritual reached just as deep. Ancestor memorial ceremonies, jisa, performed on death anniversaries with strict formal offerings, became a near-universal obligation across every social class, and the eldest son's duty to perform them shaped inheritance law, family structure, and even where people chose to live for the entire span of this dynasty. By the 1400s, Hanyang's population had grown to roughly 100,000 people, encircled by a fortified wall nearly 18 kilometers long, deliberately built to follow the natural mountains surrounding the city rather than a simple geometric grid, a design meant to harmonize the new capital with the landscape itself rather than dominate it. You'd think founding a dynasty on principles of order would produce an orderly succession. It didn't. The trouble started with Yi Seong-gye's own choice of heir. He passed over his older sons from his first marriage in favor of a much younger son from his second, a decision the sidelined older sons, veterans of the wars that had founded this dynasty in the first place, were never going to simply accept. In 1398, Yi Seong-gye's own son, Yi Bang-wan, led an armed coup against his own family, killing 2 of his half-brothers and their chief allies in a single bloody night, remembered as the Strife of Princes. If founding violence between brothers sounds familiar, it should. Every dynasty this channel has covered has one. Yi Seong-gye abdicated in grief and disgust. After a brief reign by another son, Yi Bang-wan eventually took the throne himself as King Taejong and spent his reign ruthlessly consolidating royal power, exactly the kind of iron foundation his own son would need to do something genuinely extraordinary. That son was Sejong, who took the throne in 1418 at 21 years old, and who Koreans today simply call Sejong the Great. Here's your open loop for this whole video. Everything Joseon eventually survived, it survived on the foundation this one king built in barely 3 decades. Sejong noticed a problem nobody in power had ever bothered to solve. Korean government, law, and literature were all written in classical Chinese characters, Hanja, a system requiring years of expensive study that put literacy permanently out of reach for the vast majority of his own people. So he did something almost no ruler in history has ever done. Between roughly 1443 and 1446, he personally oversaw the creation of an entirely new alphabet, Hangul, designed from scratch around the actual shapes the human mouth and tongue make to produce each sound, specifically so an ordinary person could learn to read within days rather than years. The court's own scholar elite hated it. Several senior officials formally protested, arguing that abandoning Chinese characters for a native Korean script was beneath a civilized nation and an insult to the neighboring empire, whose culture they'd built their entire status around imitating. Sejong pushed it through anyway. Sejong's reign produced more than an alphabet. He personally promoted a slave son named Jang Yong-sil into the royal court purely on the strength of his engineering talent, and Jang went on to design Korea's first standardized rain gauge and a series of remarkably accurate water clocks that regulated the entire palace's daily schedule. Sejong also secured Joseon's northern border for good, establishing a permanent chain of forts and garrisons, known as the 4 garrisons and 6 forts, pushing the kingdom's actual frontier north to roughly the border the Korean peninsula still recognizes today. His military engineers also perfected the hwacha, a wheeled cart-mounted launcher capable of firing up to 100 small gunpowder rocket arrows in a single volley, a weapon that would prove devastatingly effective on Korean battlefields for the next 2 centuries. His scientists went further still. Under Sejong's patronage, court astronomers built the Honchonui, an intricate water-powered armillary sphere that tracked the movement of the stars automatically, and produced Korea's first calendar calculated specifically for the exact latitude of the Korean peninsula, rather than simply borrowed from Chinese astronomical tables. For the first time, Korean farmers could plant by a calendar built for their own sky. His government also refined movable metal-type printing, technology Korea had actually pioneered even before Sejong's reign, and used it to mass-produce the very Hangul texts his court scholars had resisted, putting his new alphabet directly into circulation faster than any hand-copied script ever could have spread. He died in 1450, having reshaped what it meant to be Korean more thoroughly than perhaps any single monarch in the country's history. Bridge that forward for a second, because what came immediately after him is a much darker story, and it's one this channel has told this exact shape of story before. Sejong's grandson, a 12-year-old boy named Danjong, inherited the throne in 1452 with no real power of his own. His uncle, Prince Suyang, simply took it from him in 1455, forcing his abdication and eventually having the boy killed 2 years later. He took the throne himself as King Sejong. You've seen this exact story before if you watch this channel's Ming Dynasty video, an ambitious uncle seizing a child emperor's throne. Sejong, like his Ming counterpart, went on to rule effectively. It didn't make the ghost of what he'd done to get there any less permanent. 6 senior officials tried to restore Danjong to the throne in a failed plot the following year. Sejong had all 6 tortured and executed rather than pardoned, and Korean history still remembers them collectively as the Sayuksin, the 6 martyred ministers, held up for centuries afterward as the standard for what Confucian loyalty was actually supposed to look like, even against a king who'd won. Over the following century, Joseon's court increasingly split into hardening factions of scholar officials, each built around competing interpretations of Confucian orthodoxy as much as raw political ambition. Several brutal purges swept the losing faction from power entirely, sometimes with executions attached. It's a pattern that would define Joseon politics for the rest of the dynasty's existence. The worst of these came in 1498, when a private historical essay questioning the legitimacy of a coup 2 generations earlier was discovered in a scholar's personal writings. The reigning king used it as justification for a purge that executed or exiled dozens of officials from the rival faction. The first of what history remembers as the 4 great Sahwa, literary purges, that would recur across the following decades. By the late 1500s, the surviving reformist faction split again, this time into rival Easterner and Westerner factions, named for the location of their leaders' houses in the capital. Those 2 labels, and the endless subsplits that grew out of them, would go on to define Joseon court politics for the next 300 years, essentially until the dynasty itself ended. None of that factional infighting prepared Joseon for what arrived in 1592. Japan, freshly unified after a century of civil war, was now ruled by an ambitious warlord named Toyotomi Hideyoshi. He had a genuinely audacious goal: conquer Korea, then use it as a highway to conquer Ming China itself. Hideyoshi reportedly told his own commanders he intended to move the Japanese imperial court to China once it fell, and even drafted plans to eventually conquer India after that. Korea, in his own stated ambitions, was never really the final target at all. It was simply standing in the way. The Japanese invasion force landed at Busan and tore through the peninsula with terrifying speed. Joseon's army, unprepared for modern firearms and decades out of practice after generations of relative peace, collapsed almost everywhere it tried to hold a line. Within weeks, the capital itself had fallen. The king fled north toward the Chinese border. Yi Sun-sin himself was almost nobody until this war. He'd spent decades as a mid-ranking officer, once even demoted to the ranks after a border skirmish went wrong, and was appointed to his naval command in a remote southern province barely a year before the invasion began, more or less by bureaucratic accident. Hanyang itself burned in the chaos, partly from the invasion, and partly, according to several accounts, set alight by the capital's own enslaved population once they realized their king had fled and left them behind, destroying centuries of government slave registration records along with the palace roof over their heads. On the water, though, everything went differently. Admiral Yi Sun-sin, commanding a Korean navy that had actually maintained its readiness, deployed a fleet that included an ironclad warship unlike anything else afloat in Asia at the time, the Gyeongbokgung, or turtle ship, covered in an armored, spiked roof designed specifically to prevent enemy boarding parties from ever setting foot on deck. At the Battle of Hansen Island in 1592, Yi Sun-sin lured a much larger Japanese fleet into open water and destroyed the majority of it using a tactical crescent formation that let every one of his ships fire simultaneously. It's still studied as one of the great naval victories in world history, and it cut off Japan's supply lines at exactly the moment the land war was going worst. On land, ordinary civilians organized their own resistance where the regular army had failed. Guerrilla militias called Uibyong, righteous armies made up of farmers, monks, and local scholars who knew the terrain far better than any invading force ever could. Here's a part of Yi Sun-sin's story most retellings skip. In 1597, rivals at court, jealous of his success, convinced the king that he disobeyed orders out of cowardice. He was arrested, tortured, and stripped of his command. He was replaced by a rival admiral who promptly lost nearly the entire Korean fleet in a catastrophic defeat at Chilcholyang. With the navy in ruins and Japan's second invasion already underway, the king had no choice but to reinstate the very admiral he'd just tortured. Yi Sun-sin surveyed what remained of his once proud fleet. 12 ships. 13, once a damaged one, limped back into service, against a Japanese fleet of over 130. At the Battle of Myeongnyang in October 1597, Yi Sun-sin used the ferocious tidal currents of a narrow strait to his advantage, holding a single choke point where the enemy's numbers meant nothing. His 13 ships destroyed roughly 30 Japanese vessels and broke the momentum of the entire invasion in a single afternoon. It remains one of the most lopsided naval victories ever recorded. On land, the fortress town of Jinju had already become its own legend the year before, where a small Korean garrison and thousands of civilian volunteers held off a much larger Japanese army for over a week before the walls finally fell, buying crucial time for reinforcements elsewhere on the peninsula at a devastating cost. Ming China, alarmed at the prospect of a hostile power establishing itself right on its own border, sent a substantial army to help its tributary state push the invaders back. Exactly the kind of costly, distant war this channel's Ming video mentioned draining Emperor Wanli's treasury during his decades of self-imposed isolation from his own court. The war dragged on, stalled, and then reignited with a second full invasion in 1597. 7 years of fighting devastated huge stretches of the Korean countryside, destroyed priceless cultural and historical records, and killed a staggering portion of the population through combat, famine, and disease. Now you already know where this ends. In late 1598, at the Battle of Myeongnyang, Yi Sun-sin led a final combined Korean and Ming fleet against the retreating Japanese navy and won a decisive victory, the battle that finally ended the war. He was shot in the chest near the very end of the fighting. "Do not announce my death," he ordered. "Beat the drums. Keep fighting." His men obeyed him until the battle was won. Only afterward did they learn their admiral had died, hours before the celebration started. Joseon had survived its first great invasion. It had almost no idea what was still coming. The cost of that survival was staggering. Huge sections of farmland lay abandoned or destroyed. Countless historical records, artworks, and Buddhist temples that had survived centuries were burned. Tens of thousands of skilled Korean artisans, especially potters, were forcibly abducted back to Japan, where their techniques permanently reshaped Japanese ceramics. Barely 3 decades later, a new threat emerged from the exact direction Yi Seong-gye had refused to attack 2 centuries earlier. The Manchu people, the same family that this channel's Qing Dynasty video already covered in detail, were consolidating their own power in the northeast, and they wanted Joseon's loyalty transferred away from the crumbling Ming dynasty and onto them instead. That loyalty ran deep for a reason. Ming China had sent an army to help save Joseon during the Imjin War, barely a generation earlier, and Confucian court culture treated that debt as close to sacred. Abandoning Ming for an upstart Manchu power that Joseon's own scholars still privately considered barbarian conquerors felt, to men who had just survived one existential war, like a betrayal not worth making. Joseon refused, still loyal to the Ming who had helped save it during the Imjin War. It cost them. A first Manchu invasion in 1627 forced a shaky, humiliating peace. When Joseon's loyalty to Ming remained obvious anyway, a much larger invasion followed in 1636, and this one didn't stop at a shaky peace. The second invasion moved so fast that King Injo barely escaped Hanyang in time, fleeing to a mountain fortress at Namhansan-seong with a handful of guards and advisors. He held out under siege for 45 freezing days before running out of food and options entirely. At a place called Samjeondo in 1637, King Injo was forced to kneel in the snow and perform a ritual of 9 full prostrations before the Manchu Emperor Hong Taiji, the same Hong Taiji who renamed his people Manchu and his state Qing in the video this channel just made about that exact dynasty. It remains one of the most humiliating moments in Korean royal history. Joseon became a Qing tributary state from that point forward, sending regular tribute and formal deference north, even while its own Confucian elite privately continued to view themselves, not the Manchu conquerors, as the true inheritors of civilized Chinese tradition. It's an uncomfortable, quietly resentful relationship that would define Joseon foreign policy for the next 2 centuries. Part of the price of that surrender was personal. Crown Prince Soyeon was taken to the Qing capital as a hostage for 8 years, where he grew genuinely curious about the Western science and astronomy he encountered through Jesuit missionaries there. He died mysteriously within months of finally returning home, and rumors that his own father had him poisoned, threatened by ideas too foreign for a Joseon throne to accept, have never fully gone away. The tribute missions themselves became an unlikely channel for exactly the kind of exchange Joseon had glimpsed. Joseon scholars, accompanying the annual delegations to Beijing, brought back Western books, maps, and instruments through Qing intermediaries for the next 2 centuries, a slow trickle of outside knowledge arriving through the very relationship built on Joseon's own humiliation. Slowly, the kingdom rebuilt. The following century and a half produced real recovery and at times real reform, including under King Yongzhou and his grandson King Gojong, who both promoted a practical, evidence-based scholarly movement called Silhak that pushed back against rigid Confucian formalism in favor of actual, usable knowledge. One of Silhak's most brilliant figures, Zhang Yakyong, designed an entirely new fortress at Suwon using pulley systems and load-bearing techniques years ahead of anything else in Korea. Then spent nearly 2 decades in political exile after a change in court favor, using the time to write extensively on administration, law, and agricultural reform anyway. That fortress, Hwaseong, took King Gyeongzhou's own workers barely 2.5 years to complete, remarkably fast for its scale, thanks largely to Zhong's engineering, and stands today as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of the best preserved examples of Korean military architecture anywhere in the country. That same King Yongzhou is also responsible for one of the darkest single incidents in Joseon history, ordering his own son, Crown Prince Sado, locked inside a wooden rice chest until he died. This channel has already told that story in full elsewhere, so we'll leave it there for now. One more strong hand tried to break that grip before the end. In the 1860s, a fierce regent known as the Daewongun ruled in the name of his own young son, King Gojong, purging the corrupt in-law clans, rebuilding the long-neglected palace, and enforcing a strict isolationist policy that turned away foreign ships, including armed American and French incursions, for over a decade. By the early 1800s, the pattern that had quietly weakened other dynasties this channel has covered arrived here too. A string of child kings took the throne, and real power fell to their mothers' extended families, particularly the Andong Kim clan, who dominated Joseon's government for decades through marriage alliances rather than merit or election. The mechanism was almost embarrassingly simple. Whichever family managed to marry a daughter to the reigning king effectively controlled the throne for a generation, regardless of that family's actual competence, a structural weakness this channel has now seen cripple Han China, Qing China, and Joseon Korea in nearly identical form. Corruption spread along with it anyway. Land taxes, grain loans, and local administration all grew steadily more exploitative, and by 1894, that pressure exploded into the Donghak Peasant Revolution, a massive uprising demanding relief from crushing taxation, and, pointedly, resistance to the foreign powers now circling Korea's coastline. The uprising grew so large that Joseon's own court, unable to suppress it alone, formally requested Qing troops to help restore order. Japan used that single request as its own justification to send troops as well, uninvited, and the two rival powers ended up fighting each other on Korean soil instead of ever actually addressing the rebellion that had started it all. Those foreign powers had already forced their way in, not long after the Daewongun's isolationist grip finally loosened. In 1876, Japan used the exact same gunboat diplomacy Western powers had used against China and Japan itself, sailing warships into Korean waters and forcing the Ganghwa Treaty. Opening Korean ports to Japanese trade on deeply unequal terms. Korea's own age of forced openness had begun. Korea became the battlefield for a war it hadn't started. The First Sino-Japanese War, the same conflict covered in this channel's Qing Dynasty video, was fought largely over which empire, China, or a rapidly modernizing Japan, would control influence over Korea. Japan won decisively in 1895, and Qing China's centuries of tributary relationship with Korea ended for good. That same year, Japanese agents assassinated Korea's own queen, Empress Myeongnyang, inside her own palace, a story this channel has already told in full elsewhere, so we'll move past the details here. What matters for this history is what it signaled. Foreign powers no longer felt they needed Korea's permission for anything at all. In 1897, King Gojong made one last defiant gesture. He declared Joseon dissolved and proclaimed a new Korean empire, with himself as its first emperor, formally asserting Korea's equal status alongside China and Japan for the first time in its history. It was proud, and it was already far too late. The new empire wasn't just symbolic. It pushed through a genuine modernization program: telegraph lines, railways, a reformed currency, a modernized military, in a compressed rush to catch up with decades of industrial development other nations had taken generations to build. Japan simply had more soldiers and less patience than that program had time to outrun. In 1905, Japan forced Korea into becoming a protectorate. Ordinary Koreans didn't accept it quietly. Volunteer resistance fighters, once again calling themselves righteous armies, the same name their ancestors had used against the Japanese invasion 3 centuries earlier, waged a guerrilla insurgency against Japanese forces for years, hopelessly outgunned, but unwilling to simply let the country disappear without a fight. In 1910, Japan dispensed with the formality entirely and annexed the peninsula outright. 518 years after a general refused to invade China and marched home to found a kingdom instead, that kingdom's final emperor was quietly deposed, and Japanese colonial rule began. So what actually survives from 518 years? Hangul does, more completely than almost any other legacy on this channel. It's still the alphabet both North and South Korea use today, and it remains one of the only writing systems in the world with a known inventor and an exact, documented date of creation. Gyeongbokgung still stands in the middle of modern Seoul, painstakingly restored after Japanese colonial authorities deliberately demolished large portions of it during their occupation, itself its own quiet act of erasure that outlasted the empire that ordered it. There's also the record itself. Royal scribes documented nearly every official act of every Joseon king in real time for 5 straight centuries, producing the annals of the Joseon Dynasty. Over 1,800 volumes so vast and so meticulously cross-checked against multiple independent copies that they now form one of the most complete, continuous government records any civilization has ever produced, recognized today by UNESCO as a memory of the world. Joseon's court dramas, its palace intrigues, its factional rivalries, and its royal costumes have also become one of Korea's most successful modern cultural exports, forming the backbone of a huge share of the historical television dramas now watched by millions of people who've never set foot in Korea, most of them based, however loosely, on people and events this video just covered. Even the physical texture of everyday Korean life still carries Joseon's fingerprints. The underfloor ondol heating system refined during this era still warms Korean homes today, and the fermented, communal side dish style of Korean cuisine, kimchi included, Developed largely under the same agricultural and social patterns this dynasty spent 5 centuries building. That is the entire history of the Joseon Dynasty. A kingdom founded by a general who refused an order, held together by a king who gave his own people a voice they'd never had before, and kept alive again and again by people who understood exactly what Yi Sun-sin understood on that ship in 1598. Sometimes the only way to win the battle in front of you is to make sure nobody finds out how much it's already cost you. Every dynasty this channel has covered has ended the same way in the end: a river, a currency, a rebellion, a foreign power arriving at exactly the wrong moment. Joseon is the one that took the longest to get there, and it's worth asking why. Maybe it's the alphabet a king built so nobody could ever again be shut out of their own government simply for being unable to read it. Maybe it's an admiral who understood that the story you tell your own side matters just as much as the battle itself. 518 years is a long time to keep finding a reason to hold on. If you made it this far, thank you for sitting through 5 centuries of Korean history with me. If you learned something, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Subscribe if you want more full dynasty histories like this one, and let me know in the comments which country you want covered next. I'll see you in the next video.